So, what is a working brother talk without some technical difficulties? We're back after a hiccup, and George is going to take it away straight away. Take it off where we left off.
Yeah, so we're back on slide set 30. Yeah, the United States started funding a group called Hayat. I'm going to really mangle Arabic pronunciation here, but Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, and they were collaborating with al-Nusra and ISIS. They're Sunni Wahhabi fanatical groups. So when Erdogan started getting very upset at the United States recently, he started talking about, stop funding these Sunni Wahhabi radical groups. He was saying that in references to the explosion that blew up in Istiklal Street in Istanbul a few weeks back, and also the increased activity by the PKK and the YPG, the Kurdish groups in northern Syria. So he thinks that the United States is playing games of making up different names, but they're still, the inferences, they're still funding and supporting the ISIS and Al-Qaeda by training and equipping the different affiliated groups. We'll get to that in a minute. But at the time, the petrodollar enforcement aspect was overstated in terms of importance. The primary motivation posted by Spikeman is buffer zone strategy, discussed by Wolfowitz and Brzezinski's grand chessboard, is to go into that area heavily and not get pushed out of it. Going to slide set 32. Yeah, I just wanted to show those books real quick because they discuss everything in detail that I'm talking about here. I just want people to know that the books exist and that these are part of mainstream college course, graduate school curriculum. Yeah, So the upshot is that the United States was only $6 trillion in debt after Clinton left office in 2001 and Bush 43 took over. When Bush 43, the U.S. debt basically doubled to about $11 trillion, according to my charts on the right. Then after Obama left office, it just about doubled again to about $20 trillion. When Trump took office, then with Trump, with the COVID lockdowns and all of that, the debt went to, well, now we're at $31 trillion and we're halfway through the Biden administration. Before I was expecting, years ago, I was expecting the United States to hit inflation at $30 trillion by about 2027 to GAO estimates, and to hit 35 trillion by about 2033, according to the same GAO estimates. GAO is the General Accounting Office. But now we're already at $31 trillion and headed towards $35 trillion by the time that Biden leaves office. So now, where the petrodollar didn't mean that much in terms of why the United States went into a regime change, nation building strategy in the global war on terror, that wasn't a primary motivation in 2001. It was Brzezinski's grand chessboard strategy more than anything else. But now we're at $31 trillion in debt. Now the petrodollar is much more of an issue. Again, we're making the United States could not let Nord Stream go through. So the conclusion to this segment is that the grand strategy has been failing. While the debt's rising out of control, the Eurasian BRICS nations are exiting the petrodollar system gradually. The global political economic center of gravity is shifting away from Washington and London towards a Moscow and Beijing axis. While this argument may take considerably more space to explicate an intermedium strategy that would have made Eastern Europe a buffer zone would have shifted the global political center of gravity from Washington to London to Berlin, and Moscow. But with the options taken, it looks like it's going to shift it to Moscow and Beijing instead, which is worse. Let's move it to slide 34. In this regard, yeah, that's a video. That's a good video off to the right. It was done years ago. So anyway, it seems like the United States has failed on all fronts over 4 presidential administrations, now placing the U.S. at extreme risk of financial overextension. Meanwhile, the U.S. has to abandon its regime change nation-building strategy and return to a regime change destabilization strategy to hide the fact that the United States has returned to Operation Cyclone strategy of funding Sunni Wahhabi VEOs to further disrupt Russia and Chinese and Turkish infrastructural integration to the Central Asian Silk Road stands.
VEO, for all of us who are not ex-military?
Violent extremist organizations. It means terrorist organizations.
Excellent.
You know, it's the official, government speak. Yeah, we want to get into this because back in 2014, 2015, Senator John McCain was really miffed at U.S. strategy when he questioned General Lloyd Austin in congressional hearings back in 2014. This was interesting, and it wasn't really discussed. I mean, again, we widely discussed it. Those of us who worked overseas in the region, when it occurred, whether the Free Syrian Army existed, because once Al-Qaeda in Iraq became ISIL, we thought they'd pretty much executed any Free Syrian Army leadership and taken over the rank and file. If the Free Syrian Army ever really existed, it might have just been an invention. But in this case,
around the time that Russia went in to help Syria.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Russian propaganda. That's all I have to say.
Yeah.
Keep going.
Well, it's Russian propaganda explained best by Alistair Crook. He's retired MI6 guy, double retired UN intel guy. He operates out of Beirut. I think he's the most knowledgeable person in the Middle East by far.
What did you say his name was?
I get most of this information from him, actually.
What did you say his name was? I didn't catch it.
Alistair Crook.
All right.
CROOKE.
I'll have to look him up.
Yeah, I put him in. Yeah, I've mentioned him before. Yeah, people definitely look him up. It's I forget the name of his group off the top of my head. It's Conflict. I can't remember, but it's online. He's the most knowledgeable person in the Middle East. So anyway, the upshot of the congressional hearing was General Austin had $500 million to train and equip the Syrian rebels. And at the end of the process, most of the fighters that he trained went unaccounted for, and he only had a handful left. So the question is, well, they took their guns, ammo, and armored vehicles, and they left and they went somewhere. Well, obviously, they went to fight alongside the other Sunni Wahhabi VEOs, which would be Al-Nusra Front, division of Al-Qaeda, and ISIS.
And all the constant rebranding that they did during that phase. There was a lot of rebranding.
I mean, the names, they just start making, the Mujahideen has a whole bunch of different groups in it, and then the same players became the Taliban. When Hillary, there's that famous clip when Hillary was testifying before Congress, when she was Secretary of State, she just openly discussed, well, a lot of the groups that were supporting back then was, or a lot of the groups that were fighting in the global war on terror were the groups that we supported during Operation Cyclone. She didn't say Operation Cyclone specifically, but that's what she meant.
Yeah,
and I say that because the more people look into it, the more people understand why we went from a regime change destabilization program to a regime change nation building program that failed. So we went back to a regime change destabilization program. So yeah, I think President Trump, in his speak started saying, well, we funded ISIS, we started ISIS. Again, he's discussing both Operation Cyclone and the funding of Osama bin Laden and Ayman Zawahiri. Zawahiri, and back in Pakistan, the AfPak border. So then it just seems like we're doing it again, which is why everybody in the region is so upset about the United States. So whenever the Washington Post or New York Times start talking about how all the leaders are abandoning Putin, well, no, that's not the case. They're upset about the United States policies, funding the wrong organizations for so long. So we're at slide set 36. In the present case, the U.S. is advancing NATO and the EU, and the NATO military standards clauses embedded in the EU Free Trade Zone association agreements. The effort to perpetuate the petrodollar system by enforcing a captive audience in Europe as a whole increases energy costs to the extent that it will deindustrialize Germany and probably destroy their economic base permanently. That's the Michael Yon interview that he did with Jordan Peterson. I mentioned that because in his interviews, he had discussed the problems that the big plant, the big BASF plant is going to have on the Rhine. If it shuts down permanently, they may not be able to resurrect it very easily. The United States expected them to shift their operations to the United States, New Jersey and Texas principally, but they started moving their operations to China instead. Again, people called them traitors. Well, the sanctions are backfiring. So here I go through the different companies that have been lobbying very hard for the German companies to go ahead and trade in euros. The Wion video up top with Palki Sharma. She was discussing earlier on that the German company, energy company Uniper, went ahead and agreed to buy in rubles. The picture down below is the protests in September in Lubmin in Germany, where the Nord Stream comes in. They want the German people there wanted Germany to go ahead and trade in rubles and distance themselves from NATO and the United States. So with growing pressure on the Schultz administration to abandon U.S. sanctions and go ahead and trade in rubles, well, the Nord Stream magically blows up. So here I go in through the discussion of, well, why do you think that the West did that? Well, someone wanted to take the bilateral non-dollar trade agreement between Germany and Russia completely off the table. As fall and winter approaches, a bilateral trade deal between Germany and Russia became more likely. Someone wanted to make sure that Germany did not strike a deal with Russia and then supply, Switzerland, Liechtenstein, Austria, and the Danube River countries with gas. Again, that would not just be Germany leaving. That would be everybody in the Danube River also leaving. So, so here someone whoever blew up the pipeline wanted to make sure that Germany and Central Europe do not exit the petrodollar trading system. Instead, someone wants the Western Central Europe to follow the Green New Deal deindustrialization program while selling them American LNG at much higher price, while putting the German automakers out of work and punish them. Again, that goes back to to certain neoliberals and leftist groups that would like Germany to be put under the Morgenthau Plan. That was the plan after World War II to permanently turn Germany into an agrarian society. So let's go to P and start to, we're on slide set 40. We got about 9-10 slides left or something. We'll try to get through this. So P, since the only countries interested in protecting the petrodollar is the US and the UK, it only stands to reason that the Nord Stream is sabotaged by the Western countries. Okay. So to corroborate that idea, the United States wasn't only complaining about Nord Stream being built up between Schmidt administration going into Angela Merkel's administration in 2011, 2012. During the same time period, the United States heavily interfered in the Bulgarian elections to get a preferred candidate and politically sabotaged the pipeline going underneath the Black Sea from Novorossiysk area to Varna, Bulgaria. And by 2014, that was stopped. So, yeah, the significance here was the Nord Stream sabotage took the option of switching to Russian oil and gas off the table from Olaf Scholz. When you block both the Nord Stream and the South Stream, of course, then you're forcing the oil and gas to go through the existing pipelines where NATO already has Western people charging high transfer fees and high petrodollar transaction fees between Russia and Germany. So there's a lot of money to be made by moving NATO east. So go to slide 41. Yeah, the common theme of U.S. expanding NATO into Poland, Ukraine, and Georgia as match sets is to block their pipelines and ports, and blocking any direct way to send oil and natural gas to the former Warsaw Pact countries, and in this case, Germany and East and West Germany have been reunified, obviously. So the old pipelines that go to East Germany now go to the whole country, and they go to all the other German-speaking countries. So at each and every juncture, the US and UK NATO has blocked any direct transfer of oil and petroleum directly to the Danube River countries. All right. So, yeah, let's go ahead. And we already covered what's in slide set 42. So here, US, UK, NATO says that they're sending troops to protect the Romanians and protect the Moldovians. Yeah, here you're just asking the question, are they there to protect the people, or are they there to protect the petrodollar? We'll see if, as the winter gets colder and people in the Danube River Valley start to get colder. We did the Felix Rex video where he was talking about, well, him and Michael de la Brock were talking about how the heat was just above freezing in the hotels, just enough to keep the water from freezing, not really to keep the people warm. So they were giving those interviews to get that point across. So if the hypothesis here is that the United States is trying to protect the petrodollar more than the people, well, then at some point they'll start trying to block shipments. Okay, here is Q. Now that Russia has not collapsed through all 4 quarters of 2022, as several Great Game Mockingbird channels have predicted, there's several of them out there. I don't mean to pick on this one guy. Actually, his show is Subway is kind of informative. But the U.S. is at higher levels of debt while still failing the buffer zone strategy of trying to peel away Eastern Europe from Russia, the South Caucasus from Russia, from the Russian orbit, and the Central Asian stands away from the Russian sphere of influence. Okay, and then meanwhile, Russia's planning their big winter offensive. At first it looked like, you know, as I don't know, Gonzalo Lira was talking about it and the Duran's talking about it. Russia was probably looking for Ukraine to capitulate early on. They did not. The United States doubled down, tripled down, quadrupled down, and started throwing $40 billion aid packages to Ukraine after what I think they're on their third one or something like that, $110 billion. So no, Russia didn't collapse Ukraine as quickly as they thought that they would. But then on the other hand, the United States is throwing in $110 billion of support. That wasn't anticipated. You know, it's a trade-off, because I watched some shows where they're like, oh, Ukraine is winning. Ukraine didn't collapse. They're going to win now. No, logistically, Colonel McGregor is probably right. Logistically, they can't take over Russia. And logistically, it's the West that can't keep up with manufacturing military equipment to keep up.
Not only logistically, but industrially, Russia, the military-industrial complex of Russia is proving to be a behemoth compared to the complete West combined military-industrial complex. It's just not designed for the sustained thing. And as far as the Russian, you mentioned the Russian hopes for capitulation in Kiev, the strike. You know, many analysts will stick to the theory that you know, the Russians were forced out of Kiev, and it was a withdrawal, and they were a big victory on the Ukrainian side. I think it was, if you listen to what Lavrov said, he said very clearly that it was basically a ruse, a double cross on the side of the Ukrainians, who had agreed, you know, with their U.S. handlers to some terms, and then the Russians, out of good will, pulled back, and then the Ukrainians went back on their promises. That's the story. That's the story that seems most likely to me. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, we're actually headed that way. It's really, it's good that you brought up those issues, because actually, I want to go off the slide set here a little bit, since you brought that up. You know, a lot of people are like, oh, you know, it's great that the Ukrainians fought back. That's really good. They're sticking up to Russia. Well, people that say that don't realize the series of bad faith agreements that the West has done. And we've talked about that in the other shows, about how the real purpose of moving NATO east was to block in the ports, pipelines, support the petrodollar, charge big transfer fees, try to peel Germany away from Russia, because they're integrating more with Russia, not less with Russia. Because if that happens, then Russia's integrated with 5 out of the 6 power centers in the United States, and North America is off by itself. That's what they're afraid of. So, you know, the trade-off is Ukraine fought back, and a lot of Westerners, well, a lot of, you know, DC people are saying, wow, that's great. You know, people are wearing the Ukraine flags and putting the Ukraine flags on their social media. I'm surprised they don't paint their cars with the Ukrainian flag colors.
I'm pretty sure that's happened. I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah. But, you know, the reason why we talk about in analytical frameworks is, when you talk about analytical frameworks, you're talking about Pareto optimalities. You're always doing one thing at the cost of not pursuing something else. So in this case, the Western media tries to say, oh yeah, Ukraine is fighting back. Well, that implies that there's no cost to it. No, the cost is Ukraine is getting totally destroyed. had NATO not been there at all, had they followed the economic integration plans, Ukraine would be economically developing. It wouldn't be getting blown up right now with, I don't know, how many Ukrainians are killed now. It's van der Leyen said it was over 100K, but people really think it's more like 130 or 150K.
Who knows? Only God knows. But the point is that it's just as far as not sticking to the Minsk Accords. There's like so much let's say history of going back on promises that we shouldn't be surprised that the Russians withdrew on goodwill and got shafted.
Yeah. So we'll just continue with the slide set here. Okay, so the Western media has more than likely drastically overestimated the success of the Ukrainian army and severely understated the severity of Ukrainian KIAs and wounded in actions, understated the effect of Russian artillery in general media coverage in order to conceal the possibility that the regime change, nation building, and regime change destabilization strategies have all been failing. But if the Ukrainian army is too diminished to continue, as Colonel Doug McGregor talks about, then is NATO, if NATO fights down to the last Ukrainian, as Mearsheimer has predicted, what's the United States going to do next? The Biden administration cannot get a second withdrawal from Afghanistan type of disaster within a 4-year term and get Biden or any other Democrat elected in 2024. So it looks like instead of folding a bad hand, they're doubling down on a bad hand to hoping that they get the perfect card in the next draw. So they're really hoping that everything goes perfect from now on. So what does that mean? Does it mean that they're going to widen the war by stoking age-old ethnic rivalries in Europe and plan to fight down to the last Pole? Are they going to fight down to the last Romanian or last Armenian? So as Ukrainian soldiers are dying, the West is going to have to do something else. Otherwise, you're going to have a defeat in Ukraine and a disaster in Afghanistan. You got problems in Iraq and problems in the South Caucasus region. So if these things all start to go south, it could make this administration look really bad. Oh, okay. I ended this by talking about the United States had moved into Georgia ostensibly to control the Baku-Tbilisi cars and Batumi pipelines. They spent a lot of money on getting Saakashvili elected in 2003, 2004. But Georgia has remained relatively independent of NATO, so their control over those pipelines and ports is a little bit less than what they desired. Yeah, Georgia and Russia are split, but not to the degree that Western leaders would like. Okay, so you have this past few months, you've had increased activity between National Endowment of Democracy and the Soros-funded NGOs in trying to stir up trouble in Kazakhstan and the Fergana Valley. Those were put down quickly to stop another color revolution over there. The takeaway here is the more the United States goes to regime change strategies and interference in the elections in Central Asia, the autocratic leaders become more autocratic. So things are actually moving in the wrong direction there also. See, we're down to, oh, okay. So yeah, here's Steve Pickering's video on Mackinder. Yeah, in terms of Kennan and Gaddis' original Amerocentric 5-power center doctrine, my Russo 6-power center doctrine expands how the expansion of NATO is to stop Haushofer's integration of the German world in Russia, again, going back to 1930. He's the one that, he's the German professor who advocated Germany shouldn't fight Russia, they should integrate with Russia instead. So now, since the pressure to divide Russia and China has pushed them together, and the integration and the Chinese, or the Chinese Silk Road Initiative that then became the Belt and Road Initiative, has integrated China, Russia, and Germany to a higher extent, not a lesser extent. That's also backfired for the United States. This video is by, on the Serious Topics channel. There's a whole bunch of channels that have been arguing that, you know, for decades, Russia's going to invade any minute now. They want the Polish plains, you know, above the Carpathians, and they want the Bessarabian plains below the Carpathians in Romania. They're going to attack any minute. We have to expand NATO. Well, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy where the expansion of NATO leads to a Russian buildup and actually backfires, because now NATO has to expand with the series of bad faith agreements that the United States has put forth. They moved NATO eastward when they said they weren't going to move NATO eastward by 1 inch. They moved the EU east first with the NATO military clauses in it, and then they moved NATO eastward. So they really argued in bad faith with those series of movements. Of course, that culminated in the Euromaidan revolution, where they put forth a free trade agreement that wasn't a free trade agreement. It actually turned out to be a one-way. They could only trade east, not west. So here, what we're talking about, wait, how many slides we got left here? 49, 50. Okay, so we just have the 2 more. We'll just go through it and then we're done. I'd watched this Caspian Report video. I'll bring that up because I'd watched it back. It reminded me of one thing that one of my professors way back 30 years ago talked about, was the old Lithuanian-Polish Union. And that was, I'll just read over it. Shirvan of the Caspian Report explained in terms of the Mackinder and Pilsudski strategies at the outset of the 20th century. I discussed the idea in the Felix Rexcast live streams in late February and March of 2022. The Western media coverage of this alternative policy path is not discussed, and the more that the regime change, nation building, and regime change destabilization strategies fail, the more the media will either ignore or ridicule the discussion of this option that was not taken. A discussion of an interim plan is now way too late, as it would infuriate American voters if they knew of the various policy options that Professor Mearsheimer, Cohen, Sussman, and Sachs referred to. So, yeah, Shirvan of the Caspian Report, he does his recording out of Baku. I don't know him personally, but he's done some pretty good videos in the past.
He used to be really good. Yeah, he used to be really good a long time ago, but he seems to have been picked up by somebody big, and his narrative has been, directed. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, when he did his videos earlier on, and he actually really just stuck to the Caspian and Caucasus regions, those were pretty good.
Yeah,
but when he starts dealing with other areas of the world, then it becomes obvious someone's handing him the script.
Basically, yes.
And yeah, he clearly doesn't have the depth of understanding that he has in his own area. So yeah, whatever. People bend to their advertising dollars, right? Yeah, I wish we had that problem, right?
Right.
So just to close it, yeah, just to close out the last slide and you know and get this over with here. The eastward expansion of NATO was a bad faith promise not to expand NATO one inch further. The 2014 Maidan Revolution was based on a bait and switch, bad faith EU association agreement that was not a free trade agreement in both directions, had the NATO military standards clause in it, and further compounded. This issue was further compounded by Merkel's recent statements that the Minsk Accords were signed in bad faith as a means to buy time to build up the Ukrainian army to fight Russia. The U.S. has now made a series of bad faith agreements that make any peace plan untenable to the Eurasian Economic Union countries and the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative countries. Indian media has also blasted the series of bad faith promises made by the United States and the collective West. That means the goal of Russia and China now is to defeat NATO in Europe and crash the petrodollar. The world's leaders are waiting to see how this will play out, and the average citizen should be aware of this situation as well. Again, going back to the informed consent, the media keeps on saying that Ukraine is just about to win. Colonel McGregor and Scott Ritter and the Duran keep on saying, no, that's not the case. Again, I'm not looking at the war itself. I've always been looking at pipelines and petrodollars for the past 12 years. And our debt keeps on going up. Then when you start looking at it in terms of the history of geopolitical thought, as I ended the Matt Bracken videos, Russia is going to be integrated with 4 strong industrial powers as itself industrializes to become the 4th. And the United States is going to have to reindustrialize, but it's going to be allied with Western Europe that is deindustrialized. So it's going to have a 1.5 power center strategy. So that's going to put the United States in more of a precarious state. And this winter, we'll see how many, if countries do start to protest and start selling or buying oil in rubles. And then we'll see what the United States does next. That'll determine whether the petrodollar lives or dies.
Well, we'll determine how much hold of the world economies the petrodollar will have, because it's begun its slow demise already. So I don't think it's just a question. Yeah. It's a question of you know, if it will survive or not. I think it's just a question of to what extent will it have influence, because I think these alternatives that have already started to like emerge, there's no way to shut them down anymore. It's backfired spectacularly well. George, thank you for coming on. Do you want to say anything else to our subscribers, or should I say students, before we sign off?
Yeah. Just, going through these strat plans in order is kind of difficult for people that aren't. It's a very difficult discussion to approach with people that aren't used to it. So we just wanted to go over the A through Q plan here, just so people could start to learn how to do it. And we'll throw the slide set on the Telegram channels. And this, it's just a way of just getting the idea out there and introducing to people what steps they have to go through. And of course, if Russia succeeds, it means the United States fails. And what does that mean? And then there's a whole bunch of other things we need to discuss.
Gotcha. All right, George, thank you for coming on. It's been a pleasure, like always. We had some technical difficulties, but want to ask the subscribers to like, share, and subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you for sticking to the end, and we'll call it a show here. Thank you. Bye-bye.